on the call, we have a lot of everything subscribers who joined. This is kind of a members only event for them. And we have members of Compound Writing, which is a writers group. It's a paid invite only group of online writers who just help edit and contribute to each other's work. So I'll send out some more info later, but those are the two groups on the call. So a bunch of people curious about writing more online. And I think where I was going to start, we're going to really talk about the last 6 months with everything and what these guys have done building their audience and building their newsletter. But I think that what really kind of struck me is that Nathan and Dan both have this background starting and launching companies, selling companies, being an operator at Silicon Valley, like in the heart of Silicon Valley, at tech companies that are backed by the best VCs. And so where I was going to kind of start is, why not do another tech startup? You know, why launch a paid newsletter as your next business? And maybe Nathan, being the strategy guy, we can start with you, but I'm curious to hear both your answers.
Yeah, we were at Options. We no, I mean, it's the origin of this all really started with Dan, who started Superorganizers in order to start a tech company. So I think that'd be a good place to start, Dan.
Yeah, happy to talk a little bit about that. I was not trying to start a newsletter or a media business. I was trying to start another tech startup, which is my background. So previously I started and sold an enterprise software company called Firefly, had taken a couple years off and was doing some investing and trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I decided I wanted to start a productivity software company because I've been super nerdy about productivity stuff since my last company, basically. And my idea was, in order to start, I will start a newsletter. I will interview a bunch of people and do customer interviews with them. And then I'll use the insights I gather from the interviews to basically build a product. And then once I'm done, then maybe I'll have built a little bit of an audience from the newsletter that I can launch them to. So the newsletter was like a hack for me to basically get to talk to people and build a little bit of an audience so I could build a software product. And so I started doing that, I guess, in August of last year. And over time, people just really liked the newsletter. And I was like, there's something here. Maybe I shouldn't start a software company from this. Maybe I should just start a newsletter company. And just got super excited about paid newsletters and specifically business focused paid newsletters, and was thinking about who is the best person in the world to start something like that with. And Nathan was the first person that came to mind. We've been friends for a long time, and obviously Nathan's background makes him probably the best person to do this with. So I called him and he was psyched about it. Nathan, do you want to pick it up from there?
Yeah. So I had, worked at Substack for about a year. I was their first employee that they hired, kind of right after they finished Y Combinator, and raised a little, I guess not a little, it was a couple $1 million, but raised some money. I was thinking about what I wanted to do next. I've always really worked in the intersection of media and technology. And I just love, the reason why is not because it's the most lucrative or hyped part of tech, but just because I love stories and learning. And it's cool to facilitate that. And it's cool to sort of use the internet to do that in new and better ways. And there are really good businesses to be built here. Maybe not Google or whatever, but who cares? You can build a great business on it. So, I've always loved that side of it. And so when I left Substack, I was really thinking about what I wanted to do next. And there's a couple different ideas I was exploring. And I did this sort of San Francisco co-founder dating thing and was trying different experiments or whatever. And it was all going kind of well, but just it was a little bit treading water, and it was kind of taking a long time. And I was just thinking oh man, what am I going to do? And I didn't realize that Dan was thinking about starting something like this, but had I known, I would have reached out to him instantly, because Dan and I have been friends for a long time and always been, I think, mutually on each other's list of people we'd love to work with. So when Dan reached out to me about some sort of businessy paid newsletter thing, it was just yes, I had basically already been thinking about this kind of stuff, but had no focused direction or whatever. And Dan sort of put a focus on it and basically was a potential partner. And I was instantly just yes, this is exactly what I want to do. Let's get started. And so basically, Dan the first step was just like, all right, like, let's just like work on these newsletters on our own. And like, maybe it'll become some sort of business. Like maybe it'll just be a cool project to work on for a little while. I feel like it was a really important move to like not put too much pressure on it early on to succeed, because I think especially for media, it's like you can kind of ruin it if you put a lot of pressure on it to succeed really quickly. It has to come from some place that's like distinct from like needing immediate growth, just to like have something that you want to say that you're excited about and have that be enough almost. So to start, like basically, you know, Dan took Superorganizers paid. I started Divinations, and it was paid and free from the beginning. And that was like December, I think like 11th or something like that when we launched Divinations, and like Superorganizers went paid right around the same time. And then for a while, we just really focused on just growing it and writing and helping each other and editing each other and you know, keeping track of metrics together, and like really treated it kind of like in some ways a business and a partnership from the start. But like we didn't incorporate, we didn't like, you know, it was just sort of like we're putting a lot of focus energy into this, and like maybe something really cool will come from it.
Yeah, and that was something I'm curious about, because a lot of people I think on the call are just thinking like, what should I have many interests and maybe even a few areas of expertise. Like, what the heck should I actually double down on and write about? What will people actually pay for? What will be valuable to people? So I think you both kind of touched on it there with how you stumbled into the topics you chose. But I am curious how you would encourage folks to think about, you know, of the 3 or 4 things I'm really interested in, how do I kind of choose an area of focus and really kind of double down on being pretty disciplined with my subject matter?
That's it. It's such a good question. And it's interesting because like, yeah, I write a productivity newsletter, but like it doesn't, me saying that doesn't include the fact that over the last several years, I've worked on like 20 other projects that just like haven't worked. That all reflect different parts of my personality. And some of them, and yes, like productivity and like knowledge management and organizing, all this stuff is like, has been a very consistent thread for me for a really long time. But like, there are lots of other things that I could have started that I could have also like, you know, done that thread with. And so I think from my perspective, and I'm curious what Nathan's perspective is here too, saying like, oh, I need to find the thing that is like the most reflective of my personality and like going to be my like main thing, and like that I can do for many years, is actually like kind of the wrong way to think about it, because it puts way too much pressure on like writing or working on stuff. And you end up just like being like, oh, I give up. Like it's just too hard. And like, I don't want to pigeonhole myself. I don't want to like commit to something that like I can't sustain. Like you just get all these objections come up. And instead, I would even like think about it as like, I want to write one article, and like, what should I write one article about? And like, don't worry about the rest. And over time, and this is how we develop in-house newsletters too. And we can tell you about how we've done that as well. But like, just write one article and then like write another one. And like over time, something that is like very organic to you and something that like makes sense, like looking backwards, like, oh, of course I would write about that, is going to emerge. But it's not this like top-down thing where you just like decide, hey, like, oh, I'm the productivity writer today. It's like I'm gonna write one article. Oh, that was cool. Like I like that. Like maybe I'll do another one. And then looking back at like, oh yeah, of course. Like I have this like productivity thing that I've done for a long time. And I think people just get tripped up thinking that they have to like identify these like big parts of their personality and like write about them and like write about the thing that makes them most unique, when just writing and shipping consistently is going to be the thing that will help you discover that. And there's nothing else. There's no substitute for that.
Yep. I totally agree with that. I think that it helps to have some sort of label, but not to worry too much about it, because like you can always change it. And the definition of like what fits in that label can be pretty expansive, especially once you start to have an audience. Like I remember there was a moment when like, you know, coronavirus was first becoming like obviously a crazy thing. And I was like, how do I write about anything else? Because it's like in the middle of it, and like obviously, but I'm like, you know, I write about like strategy, like what matters. So I just like, I personally was interested in like understanding sort of the dynamics that would sort of generate a recession from this thing. and how bad the recession might be, and all those, kind of other stuff. And it's like within the realm of business, roughly. It's kind of like adjacent, but it's more like economics and markets. But it has implications for strategy. And then there's just this more general thing, which is like, I love to like take a big question about a complex topic and sort of research it really thoroughly and feel like I kind of understand it. And do my best to explain it in a way that's like intuitive and engaging and interesting. I just love doing that. And so even though technically it wasn't about strategy, which is what I normally do that for, it kind of worked. And I think that, like sort of viewing your sort of like marketing label of like strategy or productivity as like, that means that's all I can do is like kind of a wrong assumption. And like another even crazier example is like, what was it, like 2 weeks ago, Dan, you published essay really beautifully written that's like has more of an emotional payoff than anything else. That's like about what it's like to sort of be a family with a doctor that is sort of in the height of the coronavirus pandemic in New York. Like, it's not really about super organizing, and like that's okay. That's not the meat and potatoes of super organizers, but it's like you can throw that stuff in there if it moves you, and if you have the opportunity to, and you don't lose people's trust.
Totally. And to add on to that, I think what Nathan said is really important, is like choosing something that's specific, but like, it could be broad enough that you can like play around with it is really interesting. I think one move that I see people making when they are faced with this challenge is to like name it, just do like Dan's newsletter. And like Lenny Rachitsky is the only person that can do that successfully, as far as I'm concerned. Like,
yeah. Well,
he's just like,
it's clearly about product management. He just doesn't.
Yeah.
It's not called Lenny's PM newsletter, but it might as well be. It's in the subtitle, and like he's got a pretty clear.
Yeah. But like, generally, I think some people make that move as like, I don't want to get boxed in, so I'll just make it like about me, and then I'll be able to talk about whatever I want. I think it's a little bit of a mistake. I think trying on the constraint is really important, both from just for yourself to like give you a direction, but like also from a marketing perspective, so people know what they're going to get. Because if people don't know you already, like no one wants to read Dan's newsletter. So I would avoid that as a move, but I think the primary way to do this is just to lower the stakes for yourself and like just write an article.
Yeah, it's funny. Paul Smolera, who obviously you guys work with and who's been adding a lot of value to Compound, talked about that theme of like just write each essay on its own, and then every once in a while zoom out and see the forest, if you will. And I thought that was a really powerful example, because I think there often can be a lot of advice of really choosing a niche and just like staying in your lane, if you will. So I thought that was a cool emergent way of discovering it. So one thing I'm curious about is like when you start to maybe see these themes and start to really nail, the stuff you really like to write about. How do you both think about like, do I try to create kind of timeless content? When I think of super organizers, I think a lot of that content's kind of evergreen. Or should I do timely content like Nathan's analysis of Clubhouse, which got a lot of play? Do you guys give much thought about like, do I make something that's going to be still relevant in 10 years? Or do I focus on kind of current events, if you will, and adding my opinion and commentary? I'm just curious to hear about that aspect of how you write.
Yeah, I'll talk about myself. I think like I started doing super organizers without thinking about the fact that it was evergreen. But I think the fact that it is evergreen is kind of nice. And it turns out that like one of the problems with evergreen stuff is if it's not timely, it can be hard to grow. Because like if you're writing something evergreen that's not timely, it's not part of the current conversation, like it makes it harder for people to pay attention. But how I accidentally got around that, like this wasn't strategic, it was just like an accident, is I just did interviews. And I did interviews with people that had audiences, and that helped me grow. So I think the fact that super organizers is evergreen is great, but I personally don't spend that much time thinking about it. Like a little bit more focused on like I guess quality rather than like the evergreen versus timely stuff. But I think Nathan, what do you think about this?
I think like every writer has like got to discover their sort of signature move. And once you find it, hopefully you can keep exploiting it and refining it and like understanding why it works and doing it again and again. And like, I think if you don't have one yet, then the goal should be to experiment with a lot of different types of moves until you feel one that feels like sustainable and feels like you could do it on a regular basis and like people like it and you'll grow and all this sort of stuff. And when I started Divinations, there was one sort of move that I thought could be like a move that worked. And then it turned out it was like a totally different kind of move. And I figured that out like 3 months in, and the growth just like totally inflected. And it's very obvious in the graphs of like Divinations, like where that point is when I started writing in sort of a different way. And I think if there's one thing that would have accelerated me finding that, it would have been, potentially focusing more on just like what I wanted to do rather than what felt sort of like strategic to do, or like trying to define too much of a framework up front. And then B, just being a little more experimental if it felt like at some level something wasn't working, like giving myself permission to just like try something different for 1 week. And I think I waited a little too long to do that. But in the end, it worked out, right? It only took like 3 months. Like it was a fairly good process. You're not going to find that out after publishing one thing. You'll find it out like on the 5th thing when you feel like, I just really don't want to do this anymore. Like that's when you kind of know. And so I think it basically worked, but the key is to find that sort of signature move. And so for me, it was like, okay, there's something that sort of like tech Twitter is talking about, like a new company or a company launched a new thing, or like something kind of timely, and like there's elements of it that are complex, and there's basic questions around it, like will it work, who is it for, why, like why would it work, what is sort of like using this example teach us about broader concepts in like why some businesses succeed and others don't, or why businesses grow to become really powerful and others don't. There are patterns, and those patterns have been studied in business school, and like it's not a science, but it's hopefully on the road to it. Like that's a sort of personal project of mine, is to like make business stuff less like alchemy and more like chemistry. I found the sort of 2 sort of moves that have worked for me are, analyzing something that's like going on in tech Twitter, like that's on people's minds, that people are thinking about, that's an active conversation, and bringing to that analysis frameworks from like the business school literature. And then the other move is to actually just like dive into the business school literature around this stuff and try and really deeply understand it and just like explain it in a way so that you don't have to like do all that diving and you get the benefit of it. I think it really helps that there's 2 moves, and one is like a more natural fit for like paying, which is the explainers essentially of business school stuff, and one is good for free growth, which is like commenting on sort of timely discussions or whatever. But like that's not the only way to do it, like for sure there's different ways.
Yeah, I think that's great framing for that. Sorry, go ahead, Dan.
I was gonna say like what that made me think of is like we're very metrics driven. Like we have a meeting every Monday where we just like see how much we've grown each week, and then we try to figure out like what worked and what didn't. So like we're super like, we're thinking about this as a business and we want to grow it as a business, but we are also both very like, there's like this weird art thing that we do, which is like, this has to be a reflection of like you as a person and like your soul and like what makes you tick and makes you excited and makes you like want to lean in. And the minute you're kind of like mailing it in and just doing it because like you feel like you have to, or you feel like it's the right thing to do, like is the minute the content isn't any good. And I think that finding of your signature move is so right. It's like this, it's like finding the thing that like really makes you come alive. And when you find that, like it makes other people will notice, but not in a way that like raises the stakes where it's like, I need to find the thing that reflects my soul. It's like this is where we're trying to get to. We know that this is like kind of like an art like thing. And the way that we do that is just by experimenting a lot in a low stakes way until we find the thing that like really, really hits and resonates. And then we just do that over and over and over again.
It's fine. I think that's a perfect segue into something you said earlier when we were thinking about what's really maybe worth covering, which is like a lot of people, I think it can be very hard to actually ship, right? It's, you're putting your ideas out there, people, I think maybe it seems like a big gamble or a big risk, or you don't want to sound like an idiot. So I'm maybe curious to hear from both of you, and Dan, maybe you can start of just like the psychology of getting more comfortable with sharing your ideas online, given that what I'm hearing you both say is basically kind of play with it, like put stuff out there, write about the stuff that you're going to really be interested in, intrinsically enjoy, and then see what sticks and kind of double down on that. So it's not this terribly strategic approach where I'm only going to write about this market and that's my thing and I'll do it no matter what. There does seem to be a bit more like a playful approach where I'm just going to try stuff out. So I'm just curious to hear maybe what's worked for you all, how you've gotten more comfortable just taking more shots on goal.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really important to, when you sit down to like write or sit down to like push publish, to like really listen to the objections that come up, because your inner psyche is going to throw up a bunch of objections, like this isn't any good, or I don't want to be pigeonholed, or what if people don't like it, or what if people get mad at me. Like there's going to be a bunch of stuff, and the way that you kind of like overcome that stuff is going to be different depending on what kind of objections that you get coming up. So for me, like I definitely have that, like, oh, like I don't want to be like a productivity guy, like what if I'm just like that, whatever, and so some of the things that work for me is like thinking about this as like a learning experience or an experiment, and really like kind of, especially at the beginning, like separating myself from the actual like results of the thing, like, oh, like how many people read it, or like all that kind of stuff, and like really focusing very, very hard on the process. It's like, how many things did I ship, how many hours did I spend, how many words did I write, kind of stuff, and like really being less focused on like quality or like any of the outcome stuff tends to help a lot, because those are the things that you just get like super judgmental and super critical of yourself, and those judgments like end up stopping you from doing anything, which is the worst possible outcome.
Yep.
The best outcome is I do great stuff. The second best outcome is I do bad stuff regularly, and if you do bad stuff regularly, you will eventually do great stuff.
The thing I'd add to that is it's like this classic thing from, I think every single creative field has a version of this thing. And like the best articulation of it I've heard is from Ira Glass, where he's talking about how the reason why you're motivated to start to do something like this is because you love it and you have great taste and you can really appreciate a lot of nuances in the craft. And then you start to do it and you accurately assess that like your stuff does not measure up. And so that feels bad, right? But the answer to that question is not to therefore stop doing it, because it's not like your first draft is a test of your ultimate potential. It's just the first step, right? And so the hard part is just to keep going anyway. And that's why it's so useful to do this thing that Dan's suggesting, which is to actually like hold your nose and press publish on a regular basis. And like get feedback from generous readers, from friends, from anyone you can, and just talk to them about, your writing and like think about it and make it better. But like above all else, like ship. And so it's really, really important to hold yourself accountable to your inputs rather than your results, I think, in the early days. And then once you're shipping regularly, and you're like extremely confident that I'll like publish a thing or two every week, then at that point, maybe, okay, cool. Like let's start looking at the metrics every week or whatever. And like talk about like, what's the story that the numbers are telling us this week? That's a little bit more useful later on.
Yeah, and to add on to that, like that word publish is like very loaded for a lot of people. Like they're like, it's like you have this image of yourself like with your finger hovering over the keyboard, and like the wind starts blowing and like lightning flashes, and then like you press publish and the entire world looks at it and laughs at you, right? And that's one of those things that makes you not publish or not write at all. And so another way to think about it is to like lower the stakes for that word. So what's really important about writing early on is that feedback loop that you get from people, but you don't have to get that feedback loop necessarily by publishing it to the entire world. So other things that I've seen people do successfully is like, first, just like start with a couple friends and like put them on a private newsletter, or just literally send them an email. Don't even think about it as a newsletter. It's like, I want to send an email once a week with some thoughts to my friends. Like that's how brain picking started. Yeah, there are all these like techniques. If you notice that, for example, publishing feels threatening, like you can just do something that is kind of like publishing and gets you most of the benefits of it without it being scary, and just use that as a way to do it.
The great Matt Mullenweg quote related to this is, he says, usage is oxygen for ideas. And I think, consumption of content is oxygen for like you to keep creating more content. Because ultimately it's an act of communication, right? And so you just need to run your thoughts that you created through someone else's brain and see sort of what they thought of it, right? Like that's ultimately what you want. And so at any scale, it doesn't, like words like publishing or whatever, it's like, yeah, it's about finding some early readers, even if it's private or even if it's just friends.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
That's why I'll plug Compound. That's what Compound is so great for.
Well, I know there's just enough social accountability to where if 20 other people ship a draft in a week, you feel that pressure to do the same, and you just feel people, you have that early reader base built in. I love Dan's suggestion. Like this is literally what I did, right? Start sending an email to 100 people. I mean, you could start with 5, but I threw something up on my Facebook. Hey, I'll send an email each week to do exactly what Dan just said. Just ship something. And I just found that to be such a great low stakes way of getting comfortable. And then certainly in Compound, it's the same deal. We're trying to get you 5 guaranteed readers up front. They'll beat it up. If you really had anything that was amiss, at least it's caught then. And then you really have the confidence and the support to get it in front of a broader audience. So I think that's fantastic advice. So one thing I'm curious about is like I think a lot of folks on the call, some people already have email lists and have an audience, but a lot of people maybe are just getting started out, and maybe they have developed somewhat of a habit of publishing, but are still thinking like, how the heck do I get a few thousand subscribers to my list? I'm just curious, there might be a tad open-ended, but I'm just curious to think how you all have thought about just growing the list fundamentally. How do you drive people to the Substack to get their email and get a relationship starting to build with them? And then I think if you're open to it, Nathan, you mentioned maybe we'd be willing to share some of the stats from the last few months of how you guys have grown and what's worked. And I just want to leave the group with some really practical ideas of maybe what they can do to grow their own audiences.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think it's important to separate out the like mechanical things that are necessary but not sufficient from the stuff that like really drives it. So there's like the way that we've thought about it is there's like sort of your core engines, and then there's drag on that engine. It's like a car that's like not particularly aerodynamic. Like if it was like a flat sheet and you just push that into the wind, like that would be a very inefficient car. And so the mechanical things you can do to screw that up vary from, publishing on a website that literally doesn't have like an email call to action anywhere. Like that doesn't mean that you need to shove it in people's face all the time. That adds drag. But like you just gotta like collect emails or like Twitter followers or whatever. Like there's got to be some mechanism to like accumulate audience. And again, like that's actually not so important really early on. But like if you're really starting to ship regularly and you like, especially if you have ambition to turn it into a business, then that becomes one of those mechanical things that's important. Mechanically, like it's important to ship, I think probably at least once a week is the minimum. You could probably get away with less, but it just becomes a lot harder. And then there's other sources of drag are like, if your newsletter has titles like my newsletter edition number 31, like that's not really like a very shareable title. So if you look at the way that it shows up, if someone were to tweet the link, like it should just sort of be a true, good sort of like little hint at the sort of value you get from reading this thing. And my newsletter edition number 31 does not do that. But that's all drag. So like sources of actual like energy engines that will propel it forward is, I think, speaking the stuff from like the back of your mind that is really interesting to you or important to you or is like emotional or whatever the angle is, like kind of somehow wrangling that thing, which is sort of an inkling and pursuing it further. For the kind of writing I do, I think about it like, is this surprising? Is this important? Is this true? And is this relevant? As like kind of my main framework for doing stuff. So like just to break down like a recent piece, like the Apple Health one did sort of better than I expected, because it wasn't like a conversation that people were having. Like Clubhouse, it was one of those, like, I thought it would probably do well because everyone was like starting to talk about Clubhouse and ask the question, what is Clubhouse? So like, I felt like I could write a post that just kind of like answers that. With Apple Health, no one was really talking about it. It was a collaboration with this guy named Rob Litterst, who's amazing. And, you know, a lot of it was really like driven by his ideas, but then I put together some of the like more business school strategy theory side of things. So we came up with something that neither of us could have written on our own. I think the reason why it worked, it was like, it basically became, I think, the most viewed post ever on Divinations. Maybe Clubhouse beat it, but it's at least number 2 if it's not number 1. And the reason why is if you go down that list of like surprising, like if you read the post, the implications of what Apple is doing, like most people aren't aware of it. And it's like, so that's like different than what you thought. Important. Yeah. Like the thing that Apple is building, it would be like crazy if it existed. True. It feels true when you read it, and then you talk to people in healthcare and they're like, oh yeah, I thought everyone already knew that. And you're like, no, people don't know this. It's crazy. Getting back to the surprising point. And then relevant, this is the part about the public conversation thing. It's like, it wasn't relevant to the stuff that people were tweeting about that week, but generally people are super interested in these themes of like Apple and the way that value chains evolve over time. If you're kind of like a strategy nerd, there's a lot of like stuff there that's like relevant on the order of, you know, years rather than weeks. And so it was still kind of keyed into something pretty relevant. Anyway, I've rambled for a while, but that's sort of, I think about it as drag and engines. And then I think about like what the sources of engines is the 4 things: the surprising, important, true, and relevant.
Yeah. And I think to get into the engines a little bit more, like one of the things that we've noticed building this over the last 6 months or so is there's kind of a big difference between the stuff that we write and the stuff that like good newsletters do and the stuff that like other types of publications do. Not to say that one is like necessarily like ultimately better or worse, but they're just different. So the stuff that like you might read on like a kind of like ad supported, more like general reader-ish type website, even if stuff related to productivity or strategy, is going to be kind of like feel pretty like high level. It's almost like if you called into a call center and asked the person in the call center to explain to you productivity, like you would get like a almost like scripted, like a little bit scripted, like a little bit high level thing where it's like someone just like trying to give you the very basics and like get you to like nod your head and then go away. And that makes sense because their business model is like essentially drive traffic, sell ads, like all that kind of stuff. What we try to do is like make you feel like you're sitting down to dinner with like a really smart friend who knows a lot about productivity or strategy, and have the kind of conversation that you would have like over dinner like that. Like there are some people that just have like a little bit of a twinkle in their eye, and no matter what you talk about with them, whether it's strategy or healthcare or like literally whatever it is, you're like leaning in, especially when they get into the details. And we try to go like really detailed, like really kind of like long form about stuff that we have like that twinkle in our eye about. And that works. I think like more tactically, there are a couple of different things that have worked for us. For example, the interview model where it works really well, and I would expand that to be like involving other people in your newsletter works really well. So for me, I interview someone every week. Often that person has a audience, and in the interview they get to share all this stuff that they've never gotten to share before. And so I have this like built-in growth engine where every single week someone is tweeting it out, and often those people have like lists or they have Twitter followings or whatever. So it just like, you just like stack that growth like week after week after week, and that's really great. And you can climb the ladder of influence. So like people I can interview now are like far different and more famous than the people that I could interview at the beginning. But you can do that in a lot of other ways. So like Nathan mentioned that he co-wrote articles. You can co-write articles with people and have them bring in their audiences. You can do link sharing. Like there's just a lot of like tactical things like that you can do to get growth aside from just like aside from just writing quality stuff, which is obviously the core. Something that Nathan's done successfully that we've already mentioned is like just writing about timely stuff and like helping to push the conversation forward about timely things and being a part of that conversation and even like having the conversation on our platform. So like the head of product, Nathan wrote a really great article about the bull case for Quibi, when no one else was everyone else was just completely demeaning Quibi like in the news basically, and Nathan wrote a bull case, which was like amazing. And what happened was
not looking so hot currently, but
yeah,
they may get $27 billion from SoftBank and bail me out. So.
Yeah. we'll see. It's a unfolding story, but the point is, like, what happened is, like, the head of product of Quibi then came and like interacted on Divinations and like had a conversation, which he never would have done if Nathan had just like written like another takedown or whatever. So I think one thing that we try to do is like be the center of conversation if we can, which means like being even-handed to people as much as we can. And finally, like, I would be like remiss if I didn't say this. Like, Hacker News has been a really great audience driver for us, for both of us. And I don't have any tips for you other than like submit early in the morning with a catchy title, cover productivity or strategy, and if it doesn't work the first time, submit like a couple times, because like sometimes it gets picked up. But that has like really worked well. You shouldn't expect like you're not going to get that many you might get like 50 or 70,000 people to read it, but like most of those people will just bounce without reading it. So you're not going to get a ton of new subscribers as much as you might think, but it still is a really good source of growth. And maybe I would broaden that point to say, like, find communities of people that are into what you're into and like make sure you're sharing with them regularly.
Total. And speaking of which, we're going to do a Q&A. So everybody, if you've got questions, type them into the Q&A box, because we'll do, originally it's going to be a Zoom call. We switched to the webinar format, but anybody with a question, I'll promote you to a speaker. And we can just kind of shift into getting in what everybody on the call is interested for these last kind of 15, 20 minutes. So I was going to start. I think Steve had a couple questions. So I am going to upgrade him to a panelist here, where there's this very generous allowed to talk button. So Steve, feel free to
very generous
chime in. There we go.
Hey guys. Yeah, I had good to see you, Dan. Thanks for chatting again. What was the most unexpected thing you learned from starting a newsletter that just like, I just didn't see that coming?
How profitable it is and how quickly it can grow.
Yeah, I forgot to do the screen share. That was a part of the last question? Should we?
Yeah, if you guys are open to it, I say we do it.
Why don't you pull it up, and I'll talk track while you pull it up, and then I'll let you take it away.
It says the screen sharing is disabled.
Oh, let me upgrade you here.
And I got a second question.
Yeah.
If you could go back in time and talk to yourself before you started this, what advice would you give yourself instead of retrospect?
Start earlier. Maybe. Yeah, I think this has been like a really surprising journey for me, because like coming from the tech world, it's not something that you expect to grow like this. So like this is our graph, and like we started in December and now we're at almost $250,000 a month, not a month, a year in revenue. And that's just not something that I ever thought was possible with just writing online. And writing has been like kind of like a passion for me for a really, really long time. And I never expected to find something that would grow like this, to do something that I like so much. Yeah, I don't know, Nathan, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's the same thing. It's a little different for me, because like I knew that this, like when I was at Substack, I saw people do versions of this a lot, but I always kind of thought like, oh, they already had a huge audience and it took them years, and so like it's not. But I actually think that that's having an audience already is like, it definitely helps, but you can get it going pretty quick when you're really consistent about it. And the hard thing is being really consistent about it requires, for the most part, like being pretty much full-time on it. And being full-time on it requires a lot of confidence that it's like the right thing to do, and then like some way to get paid either by someone else or by yourself. And that's a very hard sort of chicken and egg thing to do. So there's that. Also for fun, I can show on the Divinations graph, it'll show you the inflection point where I figured out the like move that worked, and then the list started growing a lot faster. The metrics are a little bit messed up because when we did our what's it called? We merged our publications temporarily, like subscribed everyone to everything. And we're like, no, we don't want people who actually had signed up for our newsletters. But anyway, right around here, you can see this was like the early sort of part, and it was like going okay. It was kind of growing. And then right around here, I started publishing different kind of stuff, and it just took off in this totally different way. So it's pretty clear in retrospect, like there was a phase change here.
Yeah.
Any other? It's probably the only main thing that's relevant that we can show graph-wise.
Yep.
That's fantastic. I think Nathan, we may have to switch host permissions here. You may have to throw it back to me.
I've commandeered it.
I know, with great power.
Yes.
And I maybe have.
Well, Jess. Oh, go ahead, Stu.
I was going to say I have one last question, and not maybe less on the business and more on writing. What is like the one thing you've maybe picked up about writing sort of along the way, like the day-to-day craft?
Nathan, do you have a good answer?
Oh, I wish I did. I tweeted yesterday about like how sequencing ideas is so hard, and like if people had tips. And it was really funny because like there are a lot of people who I looked at their Twitter profile and they didn't publish that much, and they very confidently told me I just like, needed to like do something really obvious, like, make an outline or whatever. Like, yeah, I tried that. But it's still hard. I think maybe one thing I've learned is that at least for me so far, it hasn't felt a lot easier. It's still like every time really hard. And to me, I write, I can design stuff, and I can write code as like sort of my main three skills or whatever. Or like you can include product management-y type stuff in there. And writing is by far the hardest. When you're trying to do something that like explains something complex and also like sort of entertains people or whatever, it's just like really hard. And so currently I'm not expecting it to feel very different even years from now. We'll see. My goal now is to talk to more people who have done this for longer and sort of see sort of how it evolves. But so far, everyone I've talked to who has been doing it for a lot longer than me, like says basically like, yeah, it's hard. It just sucks. Like get used to it, So embracing that, it's like working out or whatever. Like there's a lot of things in life that are really beneficial to do, but never end up feeling like easy.
Here's one little thing that I think we picked up, and this is mostly from our editor Paul, but is to write short. So we had a lot of pieces where it was like, oh man, I'm like really struggling to like figure out how to frame this. Like I have so much I want to say, and like there's just so much here, and I don't know where I'm going with it and all that kind of stuff. And like the solution is like actually just do a short version, write 500 words and make it a good 500 words, hopefully. And then if you need to make it longer, but like if you're struggling to write and struggling to write consistently, start by just writing short pieces, and then make it longer if you need to.
That does really help.
Yeah.
Cool.
Fantastic.
Thanks, guys.
So
Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. So Jess had a question around, let's see, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Cool. So Jess, I'm going to turn you on here. I think you had a question around fiction as a genre, and if that's something that you guys have thought about. I know, Dan, you've been interested in writing fiction.
Yeah.
So Jess, I don't know if you're with us, but feel free to unmute and elaborate if you'd like.
Sure. So this is actually more of a question on behalf of my sister, because I asked her to join this today, but she is recovering from COVID, and so I wasn't sure if she was going to be able to make it. So, but she has her master's in creative writing, and she is a prolific writer. I don't say that just as her sister, but I've also thought of writing in a serial fashion, because I always think about writing a novel, but it seems like such a large undertaking. And so I think of, shipping chapters as a way of writing a novel. And it seems like a newsletter would be a great way to keep yourself accountable. And what you all said earlier about just getting it out there and not overthinking it. I was the one that said, you know, analysis paralysis is what gets you every time. But I wanted to, just because I know, especially you, Nathan, think about things as models and futuristic, you know, future, and your thoughts about Quibi. This is kind of looking at fiction in that way. What do you think of newsletters as it pertains to fiction and serial fiction?
Yeah, I mean, so I can definitely give my answer. Also, Dan is actually writing a novel. I don't know.
Oh,
Dan?
well.
I just
That's why
realized
he has that expression on his face that I see then.
I'm happy to jump in.
Please do.
And this is actually funny because I'm remembering some stuff that Nathan, I don't know if you remember.
I
really
have distinct memories of pacing around the office at Gimlet Media and talking to you about whether you should publish like a chapter or something.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Okay, let's talk about this. So I'm writing a novel for like 2.5 years. I'm on my 4th draft, and obviously none of it is released. Yeah, it's a really big undertaking. And the only way that I was able to just continue doing this is just like because I just really like it, and I'm not really thinking too much about like the magnitude of it or what I'm trying to achieve. I'm just like trying to like consistently make progress on it. And for a long time, I was writing it in a vacuum, and I think that was a little bit of a mistake. Yeah, I'm on my 4th draft, and like each draft has almost been like a different book, and so it was like a little bit difficult for me to be like, oh man, like should I write it in serial fashion? Because then if I write it serially, then if I make a mistake in the first chapter, like I won't be able to go back and like revise it, and I want to have the whole complete thing. And I don't know, you get turned around on all these things, and I actually like at the very beginning almost did that. I almost did it as a serial kind of like open source book. And I can't remember exactly what you said, Nathan, but you definitely convinced me not to. You were like, don't do that. And then I got like a little bit, I guess, in my head about it, and I didn't. And I don't think that was necessarily a mistake, because like at the time I was such a bad fiction writer that like I really just needed to like write a lot of bad stuff, and maybe like having it in public would have demotivated me. I'm not really sure. But if I could go back, I would probably just write it in public, or write it in like a semi-public way where I had like friends reading it and all that kind of stuff. You just have to do it in a way that like protects your ego so that you don't get demotivated by it. And you're doing it with people who will be supportive. Like my friend Alex is like, I loved showing him my early drafts because he was like always 100% supportive no matter what. And that's like what I needed, because I was writing really bad stuff. Yeah. So anyway, I don't know if this is helpful. I would totally consider doing a serialized fiction newsletter. I'm not sure. Like there are some examples of that. Like Andy Weir, who wrote The Martian, did this. Like he wrote it in a serialized form on his blog. And historically, like a lot of novels were written that way, like in the early 1900s. I don't know of a ton of like popular fiction newsletters currently. I've seen people try, but yeah,
Twilight
I think it's
too.
Yeah. Sorry?
Twilight started out as fan fiction and serial fashion.
I didn't know that.
And my sister has won awards for her writing, so it's not even that this is like a dream that she's had that's coming to fruition. She's worked her whole life towards it. I think it's a matter of getting it out for more people to see, and seeing that she can, take the mindset of startup, which I'm from the digital world. That's been where, working for startups and SaaS companies, and translating that into her world. And that's where the question came from, and why I encouraged her to be in here. So I think this is really helpful. So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing. I'm glad you actually had the direct experience. That was great.
Yeah.
We're sending our best to her. I hope she's feeling a little better.
And I just confirmed she's listening too. So she's heard it firsthand. So thank you. Her name's Annie.
Annie. Well, yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to read more of Annie's stuff and look it up. But like, yeah, I think it's actually, especially if you already kind of have like an audience and a pretty clear like world you're building, for the kind of like, there's characters you just want to keep hanging out with type fiction, like a serial newsletter that just like expands on the world a little bit every week, I think would just kill. And I think it's seriously like underrated. And like, it's such a better business model than selling books, just in terms of like, creating stability, right? Like through subscriptions where you have like a predictable amount of revenue that's like growing somewhat predictably. It's such a great foundation to build on. And I remember what I told Dan back in the day, which was like, I was like, well, our instincts are around like software where like you just ship it really early when it's really embarrassing. And then you keep improving it over time. And it works because like software is the kind of thing that you use over and over and over again because it's like a tool. But a story is like, you go through it once and like, you're not going to read it again probably when it's better. And so I think it really works if you have like characters going through new stuff all the time. And like, you're not like one specific plot line is not like that big a deal, but it's like a world and it's people. And especially if you're pretty confident about who those people are and why people care and like what their world is and what kinds of situations they go through. And like, you can think of a bunch of ideas. But also in retrospect, yeah, I probably should have just said like, ship it anyway. But it felt like there was a very specific plot that was like very important to Dan that he was like, wanted to really craft that plot line. And I think that's the thing that's harder to do in this sort of iterative ongoing basis. Maybe I'm totally wrong about that.
Yeah. The other thing that I think motivates a lot of authors is like, you want to have a traditionally published book. Like you want to see the book in bookstores. You want it to be like this thing and it says like Random House on it and all that kind of stuff. And there's a real romantic appeal to that. And it's part of the reason why people write. And you definitely lose that doing this. And that's just like a trade-off that you have to kind of like accept, I guess. I mean, maybe if it does really well, like you'll still get bought by Random House, but like it's not the traditional path. You have to be like willing to like just kind of jump off the traditional path and do something new that I think will probably be more common over the next 10 years, but isn't something that people are doing right now.
Awesome. Great question. Thanks, Jess. And Annie, hope you're feeling better. Our next question, I know we're running up on time here, but we're happy to run a few over if people want to stick around to get their questions answered. But the next question actually comes from Megan Groves. Megan, if you are ready, I will promote you here. And it's around kind of the switch between free content and paid content and how you guys maybe think about that funnel or what should be gated and what shouldn't. But Megan, not to put you on the spot, you can tell me if you're free to unmute.
Yeah, thank you. Just a simple question. For those of us who've been accustomed to doing a lot of free content marketing or have a number of articles out there that people are, pretty familiar with getting access to without paying, do you have any tips on making that transition and kind of when and how to start launching that subscription feature?
Yeah. I mean, what we did is we basically just flipped the switch and then figured it out after we flipped the switch. I don't know if that's the optimal way, but I think it basically works. It's really hard to figure out ahead of time, I think. I think it's like you put yourself on the spot and then you figure out how to make it work more so than you like optimize the launch. Because it's all about the like longer term, like ongoing machine rather than like if you're launching a book, maybe it's like a different story, I don't know, Dan, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm curious, is the worry like that if you have a free audience that expects something that they'll get angry if you make stuff paid, or is it more of like a tactical, like what should be behind the paywall?
Both good questions, could be part one, part two, but more the former. So, but I guess it's interesting because it sounds like what you're saying is, build the audience and then risk losing them potentially when you make that switch and not worry about it, rather than launch something that's paid from day one or try to continue to cater to an audience in a certain way long term. But maybe that's the answer, right? Is sorry, I'll let you speak. But
oh no, finish what you're saying.
It was actually I guess the second question, it could be part of the answer, right? Is just being very diligent about selecting which pieces are free and which are not.
Yeah, actually what I did for Superorganizers, so I turned on paid for Superorganizers when I had about 1,000 free subscribers. And I literally just turned on paid and didn't announce it. Like I didn't even paywall anything. I just turned it on and people just started paying for it. And I was like, whoa, this is cool. And then what I did was I first just locked the archives. And so there was now like a couple free posts and then the rest of the old interviews were like all locked and people kept paying for it. And I was like, oh, this is cool. And then what I started to do was I kept writing the free stuff, but then I would like layer in some paid posts, like in addition to the free stuff. And then I would send out to the free list, like, hey, here's this paid post. But it wasn't like, hey, I'm going paid. It was like, hey, here's a paid post that like you can read if you pay. And so I just like built it organically rather than like having to have this moment where I was like, hey, like I'm going paid and like risk people getting like angry at me. It was just like flip the switch, lock the archives, write some paid posts, and like see what happens. And there's a bunch of things that you can do like that that will allow you to experiment with it without potentially risking your free customers.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah, I'm not publishing on Substack yet. Any other tips about pricing? Do you get to set your own pricing? So this is kind of a feature question, but.
Yeah. On Substack, you set your own pricing. A lot of the kind of more personal entertainment fun type newsletters charge in the neighborhood of like $5, maybe $10 a month. And then the more like use this for work kind of newsletters are maybe like 10 to 15, and sometimes a lot more. Like there's one that's like very specialized on the bankruptcy industry, appealing to bankruptcy lawyers, and it costs $40 a month. So it a little bit depends on kind of the market and the use case. But yeah, that's like roughly sort of what the market is settled around, I think. And you can always try something different though. It's very early. It's not like it's a figured out thing.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
Awesome. Thanks, Megan. So actually, I think Jose had a question around kind of where to find these early audience members. You mentioned Hacker News is a really like effective kind of growth channel where a lot of your readers are hanging out. So Jose, if you're available, I'll promote you here. And feel free to unmute and elaborate.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, hey, great, thanks. Thank you guys for being here. So I've got 2 questions related to growth. So one is, what's your process for finding early communities? And just to be a bit more specific here, we can always be a bit lucky if we find a good channel, like maybe post on Hack News and we might be lucky, but do you guys have in mind any process for how you just go through this? And the second one is, how do you build relationship with early adopters to help that grow?
I wish that we were more scientific about this, and I think we'll probably have to be over time, but we're just doing stuff basically. We're just making stuff we like.
It's all of our energy and like scientific-ish type like systematic thinking has gone into what kind of stuff to write, and then we just after that chuck it onto Twitter and post it to Hacker News or whatever. Like it's like it's been very unscientific about the distribution part and unsystematic.
Yeah. I would say like if you wanted to be systematic, and the reason it works is because like we are writing about stuff that we care about, so we're already part of those communities. So we don't have to go doing the like scientific like search for like a community. But if you wanted to, I would just go on Reddit, like Google for it. Like you'll find like a dozen, whatever it is. If it's like lawn care, like there's a dozen like lawn care sites. There's a dozen like lawn care subreddits, and it's not going to be as well formed of a community probably as like Hacker News is for tech nerds, but like that's a thing.
Sorry, one other really quick tip is being a really good member of those communities, supporting other people's work, replying to things that other people are doing with like care and giving people real quality of attention is, I think, actually really important. And I realize like that's something I think that Dan and I have both done that have helped is like we're a part of these sort of communities on the internet and on Twitter, like, and I use community in like the lowercase sense. Like it's not like, some like specific piece of software that's like where some people are gathered around. It's like just like people roughly in our universe on Twitter that we just reply to and joke with and DM and say, hey, that was a great article or what, like that kind of stuff. And that's just like organic, like us, like just making friends, Yeah.
And in terms of your second question, like how do we kind of nurture that early community? For a while, we're not doing this as much anymore, but I think we should probably restart it. We were just super busy the last couple of weeks, but like for a while, anytime anyone signed up for a paid plan, we emailed them and said like, hey, for me, it was like, hey, do you want to do coaching? And I'll do like a 30-minute, like one-on-one productivity coaching session with you. And I just met so many readers that way. And A, it was like really fun for me. B, I think it was fun for them and gave them a lot of value in their subscription just like off the bat. And then C, it just gave me a ton of stuff to write about. Like every time I had one of those conversations, I had like a bunch of ideas for like what I wanted to write about next. So it's just like a really, really positive thing to do to like make a point to reach out to people that are subscribing.
Okay, no, that's really interesting. Thanks. Just maybe as a quick follow-up, just relate to this, which I think is very, very tightly tied to it. Was there any point, do you guys follow any process where you guys just knew you had like cracked the formats, or like how specific your content was going to be? Or was it more like something that you were sort of like improvising and it just felt right?
Yeah, it's been different for both of us. So like for me, Superorganizers has been roughly the same since I started. Like the interview model, the way I write interviews, like it's changed in like in little ways, but the broad strokes are the same. And then I've like layered in the paid stuff on top of it. And then Nathan, I think like basically started with the interview model and then flipped to something else that worked way better for him.
Okay, cool. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you.
Awesome. So again, I know we're running over, but maybe we'll slide in two or three more questions. Sorry that we got used here.
For us to just like blaze through these, because like we can see all of them and it just takes a lot longer if we like invite people up and they restate their question. But can everyone, if we can just like run through the comments,
let's do it.
Like lightning around it, because I just would hate for someone's question to not get answered. And I would also hate to go over by like an hour. So for everyone who's like
totally.
here or whatever, waiting for their question.
Cool. Yeah, you guys want to rip through the open Q&A questions? We got some in the chat. Maybe we could do right after.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I think we'll start with Corinna's then, which is just, I have a question on writing articles. I'm really interested in how you weigh up writing more frequently versus publishing less frequent but longer and more in-depth articles. So like, how do you think about the being prolific and making those more polished pieces, I think is one way of putting it.
Yeah, we've kind of vacillated on this, and we've done both at times. And I don't know how much it matters. Like, I think you can do either and be successful. And I don't even know if you really have to pick. Like, you could do short stuff most of the time, but occasionally throw up a really long post, or do long stuff most of the time, but like occasionally do a really short thing. And I think it's more important to just find something that works for you, and that works for your audience. And you know, I mean, certainly if you like write a long thing, it could take longer. And like, if you're waiting 2 months to publish something, and like you publish like 4 things a year or whatever, like that's probably not enough. But yeah, I think that there's a lot of variations within this that could work. I don't know. What do you think, Dan?
Definitely. I mean, what we've tried to do is like write one long thing a week and then write a couple of short things a week. And that we've not really been able to like fully do that all the time, but that's what we shoot for. But other people like, Byrne Hobart or Ben Thompson, like they just write like 4 days a week, and it's just like whatever I get out, and it's usually like 1,000 to 1,500 words. But yeah, I think it's about finding what works for you for sure.
I think that the longer things tend to get shared around more, and the shorter things are like maybe a little bit of a better email experience, where you can like when you're trying to swat away emails, you can be like, oh, this will be good, and it won't take that long, so I'll just read it right now.
Yeah, the longer things are also better, like paid stuff. People feel better, I think, about paying for like a big long article than they do about paying for like a 500-word article.
Awesome. Yeah, it's great advice. So I'm curious, actually, Dan, you had just kind of touched on this, especially early on. Did you interview your readers to kind of shape the direction of your newsletters? So kind of that hand-to-hand combat with early readers, how influential was that in deciding what you wrote about next?
Yeah, 100%. Although I didn't start doing it until I went paid. So that was about 6 months into Superorganizers. Although I hadn't really been publishing regularly on Superorganizers. I was like, I did a couple posts a month from like August to December. And then I really started to take it seriously. But yeah, once I went paid, like I tried to interview every single person that signed up. And we also do like surveys and that kind of stuff to like see how people are feeling about the newsletter and all that kind of stuff.
Also, I'm just curious, did it shape the direction of what you maybe doubled down on or cut some stuff that maybe didn't resonate with folks?
Yes, I have like a very good idea of the types of, there's a bunch of different like sub communities inside of Superorganizers, and I have a very much clearer conception of the types of people that subscribe. And then I try to make sure that the content mix like hits the different topics that those different types of communities care about, even though they're all under the like super organizer productivity umbrella. There's a bunch of people that like have different needs. And so it helps me kind of like figure out where to go. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. So Sarah Campbell had a question around building on Substack. Are you planning to build a more robust homepage, especially with you guys doing kind of the bundling approach, so that people can kind of go through the archive a bit more easily? How do you kind of think about long-term the hub for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, we're not really a technology company. We're like a media company. So we want to stay on Substack as long as it works. Also, you know, it sort of depends on Substack's direction that they go in. And so there's a world where it doesn't meet our needs anymore because they want to go more in this like YouTube-y type direction almost. So there's not a lot of like flexibility or customization. But if they go more in the like Shopify-y kind of direction where it's more powerful and there's APIs and all that kind of stuff, then like we could potentially stay. It's just a question of like, I guess, pragmatism on like, you know, what does it take to make this sort of bundle work? And right now it works on Substack, so we're thrilled to be on it. We love Substack. You know, we'll see where it evolves from there. But yeah, I mean, would love to make it easier to discover past issues more easily. The way we solve for that now is in the weekly digest that goes out on Sunday mornings. We just always highlight some stuff from like the archives basically, because so much of it is pretty evergreen. So that's one thing we do.
Awesome. Cool. So the next question, what did you already have in place before reaching out to your initial audiences? Like kind of just the raw materials that you all had in place before you really launched Superorganizers, launched Divinations. What are just like the table stakes for starting to build an audience?
Nothing.
I mean, basically nothing, but like also like, you know, Dan has like written a lot of stuff that has done really well over the years. I have to like a lesser extent published some stuff on the internet. You know, we had a really interesting set of like life experiences, I would say, like a lot of reading or like, you know, just my time at like Gimlet and Substack and like building products has like shaped a lot of my like opinions, and like we had all that kind of stuff, but we didn't, I mean, what did you mean by nothing, Dan?
Yeah, I guess what I was trying to say is not that is, yeah, obviously we've done a bunch of stuff before that, but I didn't spend any time like preparing like 4 different posts or like writing like a manifesto about what Superorganizers was. I just did an interview and like wrote the interview and then published it, and then I was like, I'll figure out the rest later.
Totally.
And basically, I don't know where that question was coming from, but sometimes there's a temptation to like do a bunch of preparation before you do the thing, and usually the preparation is wasted. Preparation is great when you know exactly what you're doing, and basically the most important thing is like shipping an article rather than like preparing to like, you know, preparing to ship or preparing to like start the newsletter or whatever. I would just do the article.
Totally.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. So Alberto, both your newsletters strike me as highly educational. So you kind of introduced, especially in a lot of Nathan's stuff, there's some foundational concepts and theories that are then kind of called back on later. So is that kind of intentional? Do you have this almost like narrative you're crafting throughout these pieces? And then just generally, how do you think about introducing these concepts and theories kind of throughout your work?
Yeah, I think it's definitely intentional. I think it really helps to have like a worldview that you sort of develop, and you can straight up, like, I haven't introduced any new ideas in strategy. I just try to understand the ideas that are out there and then apply them to like new stuff that comes up. Like, you know, maybe one day I'll like some original thing will occur to me, and until that happens, like, I'm very happy to just sort of apply stuff that other people have come up with and use it that way. But yeah, there's like, I think the basic job of a columnist is to like have a model of the world and then run current events through that model and spit out some analysis of like, or explanation of those events. It's a little bit different, I think, for Superorganizers, because it's not like current events, but it's still like, I mean, with Dan, I don't want to speak for you too much, but like you have a model of like how productivity works, and there's fundamental concepts, and then you like can interview people, and each person is almost like the Superorganizers equivalent of an event. But you can talk more about that.
Yeah, I mean, what I try to do is take a pretty unbiased view for the interviews, where I'm literally just like putting out what people do, And then at the top of the interview, I'll usually have like a little bit of like my thoughts on like why this is interesting or important. Sorry, my headphones just ran out of batteries. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
I'll have some thoughts on like why it's interesting and important. And then for the paid stuff, it's like, yeah, I have some models for like how to think about productivity, and I'm not responding to current events. I'm just responding to like my own, whatever is top of mind for me. And then talking about those models and like applying them to different situations, all that kind of stuff.
Awesome. So Jess had another question, I think. Are you seeking out the people to add to the bundle, or are they approaching you? So kind of how much outbound, if you will, are you doing, and how much just magnetic force is coming on you via Twitter and Substack?
It's all inbound. We're just swatting people away. We can't keep up with it. I'm just kidding. It's both. It's both.
Yeah, and that's actually, it ties in well. There's one question that was still floating around in the chat, which is just like, what is the ratio of kind of your time spent writing versus your time spent promoting? Because I think that's something that maybe a lot of people overlook, is like, you're not only a writer, but you're a marketer, you know, a digital strategist. You have a lot of other hats you have to wear. So how do you think about maybe that ratio of producing the work, but also making sure you're promoting it?
I wouldn't say we spend that much time promoting stuff, but we do spend a lot of time doing things that are not writing, because we're building an organization. We're thinking about how to bundle in more writers. We're hiring writers. Like we're doing a bunch of stuff, and so that takes up a lot of time. But it's not really a promoting versus writing thing. It's like a writing versus like creating the organization to like make more writing thing. And it depends on the week. Like, I think usually I'll spend like a day or two a week writing, and then like the rest of the time doing other stuff. But that's kind of the split.
Awesome. Cool. So answer that one. Oh my goodness. I think we're down to our final two. So for all the true believers who stuck through to the end here. Ethan asked, curious about your individual approach for reading other newsletters consistently each week, and a few other paid newsletters that you're subscribed to. So who are some of the writers that you guys really like reading? Have they been a good source of inspiration? You've probably already partnered with a couple of them. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm just curious to hear, what other newsletters do you guys kind of look at consistently each week?
Do you want to start?
You want to go?
Oh, I can go. Okay. Yeah. So, Ben Thompson is obviously the GOAT of my world. So I love a lot of writers. Like, some publish less frequently, like Kevin Kwok published a really awesome thing on Figma this week that I have yet to dive into, but like the outside of it looks amazing. And, then there's like Bern Hobart, who's publishing all the time and is awesome. There's great podcasts. Like I love Dithering. I love Invest Like the Best. It's all the stuff you'd probably expect. And then also just like, I think it's really important to dip into like stuff that's more like Astray. Like I love Slate Star Codex. There's too many to mention. And it's a little bit chaotic. I don't have like a super intentional approach. It's more just like indulge my curiosity and hopefully something good will come from that.
Same thing. I read a ton of different stuff, including a lot of the people that Nathan mentioned. Two other people that I read a lot are Paulina Marinova and Webb Smith. I just subscribed to Webb today. He wrote a really good essay that got me. So definitely recommend those two people.
Awesome. Cool. So final question. Brian asked, how do you decide on people to interview? So, or even kind of cross promote. So how do you think about those folks that you feature who are likely to kind of share to their respective audiences? And then what if they're initially kind of apprehensive on a fairly new blog? So Dan, you mentioned kind of, it's tough to get those early people, but once you do, you can kind of climb the chain and you got Seth Godin as somebody in your, in Superorganizers. So how do you think about picking people to interview and kind of getting them convinced to take the call?
I as with most things, it's not very scientific on the thinking about who to interview thing. Like I just found a bunch of people that I thought that were successful, and I kind of I'm like this. I do a lot of the nerdy productivity stuff, so I had a list of people that like I knew were doing similar stuff that I was like personally knew, and so those are the people that I started with. So like there's this guy Cesar Batista, which is the first Superorganizers article I wrote. And I just knew him from college, and I just knew he was like this crazy guy that like wrote this, like had been writing his own personal encyclopedia for like 6 years or 7 years. And so I was like, when I was like, oh, I need to interview people, he was like the first person I thought of. So basically what I did is I just started with my friends or people that I was like acquainted with. And then those articles did well. I gained a little bit of audience, and that gave me permission to like get intros to people that I maybe didn't quite know, but were like slightly above my friends in terms of like audience and status. And then I got to interview them. Those interviews did well. And then I kind of just like climbed up from there. And then in terms of like mix, like I do a lot of interviews. Like I've done probably 50 or 60 or something interviews, and I've only released like 20 or 30. So there's a lot of interviews that I have in the can that either just didn't work or weren't interesting enough, or I just haven't had time to release yet. So I kind of like cast a pretty wide net, and I'm pretty open to spending an hour with pretty much, not at this point, not anyone, but like very early on, like almost anyone. And then over time you kind of like tune your eye to like people who are really interesting. And there's a lot of times where like I'm on Twitter and I'll just see someone talking about their productivity hack, and I'll be like, oh, that person would be great. And then I just DM them. That's another good way to do it.
Awesome. I'll let this one tangential question slide in here, or I should say follow-up question. What's the most time, if someone's not doing this full time and they want to do an interview, what takes the most time in an interview? Do you have any advice on how to just be somewhat efficient?
The most time consuming thing about interviews is writing them. So conducting the interview is pretty simple. It's just like you ask questions. I mean, sometimes you might have to do research beforehand, but writing the interview is really hard. It's deceptively hard. So if you read a Superorganizers interview, it's like 3,000 words. And it reads like in the person's voice, but actually, if you look at the transcript of a Superorganizers interview and then look at the finished product, they're like completely different. And I'm basically like rewriting what they said in their own words, but like in a way that like reads well and has a narrative arc and has all this like stuff that like makes it feel like an essay written in the first person. And that is actually like really, really hard to do, because people don't talk like that when you interview them. They talk in circles. They jump from point to point. Like they don't fully explain things. And so most of the work is actually like making the interview read well.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've done it. So with an extra little half-hour Q&A, just thank you, Nathan and Dan, for being so generous with your time. I think I just learned an enormous amount, and I hope everybody else did too. What we'll do is, it's a perfect note to end on. We will send out this interview. I'm going to attempt my best to clean up the transcript and pull out some quotes here, but everybody stay tuned. We'll send an email with the recording, some notes, and I'll send a link to Compound Writing for anybody who's also looking to write more online. We're just a group of people who give each other good feedback. And it was just such a privilege to get to pick both your brains. So thanks for making the time.
Thank you for
Thanks
having
for
us.
having us.
This was awesome. Thank everyone for being here. It's like so cool to just do this. This is great.
Yeah, this was a blast. Thanks everybody for the awesome questions. Those were just stellar, and stay tuned for the notes and the recording.
Let's all give ourselves a big pat on the back.
Yeah, happy Saturday. The fact that we did a Zoom call on a Saturday, I mean, these are the true believers. These will be the people who build the next everything bundle. So thanks again for all the time, everybody.
Yeah. Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nathan and Dan. See you guys.